Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rangeen Pallav Tripathi. I am a faculty of law at National Law University, Odisha. Today, we will be discussing about the models of criminal justice system. The primary objectives of this module are the following: to understand the meaning and importance of criminal justice models, to have an understanding of the relative merits and demerits of the different criminal justice models. A criminal justice system is the confluence of the entirety of the substantive and procedural laws which regulate the administration of criminal justice in a given jurisdiction. A criminal justice system comprises of a plethora of rules and regulations which are detailed and specific in nature. In order to have a coherent set of specific rules which will govern the administration of criminal justice, it is essential to have an overarching objective or set of objectives on the basis of which individual and specific rules will be formulated and arranged. The rules and regulations which constitute the criminal justice system are the superstructure built on the foundation of the overarching objective or set of objectives. Without an identified underlying philosophy, it is impossible to maintain any degree of consistency and coherence in the formulation of individual rules and regulations. Thus, much debate has spanned as to the ideal philosophy or objective which should form the basis of a criminal justice system. The underlying philosophy of a criminal justice system enables us to develop a definitive framework within which the desirability and feasibility of individual rules and regulations can be assessed and determined. Such particular macro structuring of a criminal justice system is known as a model of criminal justice system. A model of criminal justice system is oriented not around any particular and detailed rules, but around certain core values and principles. Various jurists have proposed and advocated for different models of criminal justice system based on values and principles prioritized in each such model. Firstly, we can look at the two models suggested by Packer. The first one is the due process model. The central focus of the due process model is to ensure that criminal justice is ensured only by adhering to a due process of law. The emphasis of this model is to ensure that the procedure followed in the administration of criminal justice is fair, just, and transparent. This model does not seek to provide greater strength to either the prosecution or the defense. It insists on equality of field for both the parties by strictly following the established formal rules and procedures. In a due process model, presumption of the innocence of the accused and the requirement of a fair trial are some of the non-negotiable mandates. Also, it becomes essential to conduct the proceedings of the court in open, which is accessible to public. The due process model focuses on ensuring that the defendant has adequate rights to safeguard himself against arbitrary or unwarranted conviction. The primary objective of the due process model is to ensure that an innocent person is not punished, even though some guilty ones may escape punishment in that process. The essence of the due process model is to ensure that the punitive force of the criminal justice system should be unleashed only after following a fair and just procedure. Critiques of this model point out that huge amount of importance is given to the rights of the defendant makes it hard for the prosecuting agencies to secure convictions. Too many guilty individuals walking out free corrodes the credibility of the legal system. The other model which was suggested by Packer was the crime control model. At the other extreme of the due process model is the crime control model. In the crime control model, the primary objective is to curb crime in the society by handing out punishment to offenders in an effective manner. Towards this end, this model does not accord a high priority to the rights of the defendants. It puts greater stress in ensuring that peace in a society is maintained through crime reduction by successful prosecution of the offenders. In this model, the societal interest in control of crimes is deemed to be greater importance than the rights of individuals against the criminal justice system. Unlike the due process model, it is not a concern in this model that if innocent persons also get punished while trying to secure conviction of suspected offenders. Thus, this model willingly accepts the risk of convicting some innocent persons while trying to punish the guilty. This model is characterized by a presumption of guilt of the accused built on the foundation of speed and efficiency of procedures. Critiques of this model argue that effective crime control is possible only when substantial issues pertaining to social and economic structures are addressed, which lead individuals to commit crimes in the first place. A rigorous system of prosecution and punishment is believed to be ineffective in achieving the fundamental objective of this model, that is, controlling the rate of crime in a society. The primary criticism against the models proposed by Packer is in the extremities of their emphasis. Packer constructs his models in opposite extremes with no trace of balancing elements in either of the models. The models are also founded on very narrow propositions with no scope to factor in various other concerns regarding the crime, including but not limited to the circumstances of the offense, background of the offender, etc. After we have discussed the models which were proposed by Packer, we will now discuss the models which were proposed by King. King expanded on the theory of Herbert Packer by identifying 6 separate models of criminal justice, including the crime control model and the due process model. King felt that confining the construction of criminal justice models to only 2 is too simplistic and insufficient to deal with the complex relationship between society and crime. Thus, he added 4 more models to the ones already propositioned by Packer. The following were the models proposed by King: medical model, bureaucratic model, status passage model, power model, due process model, and crime control model. With each model that he proposed, King also identified a primary social function which the model was supposed to serve. The function of the medical model was rehabilitation. The function of the bureaucratic model was management of crime and criminals. The function of the status passage model was denunciation and degradation. The function of the power model was maintenance of class domination. The function of the due process model was justice, and the function of the crime control model was punishment. Now, we'll start our discussion on the various models proposed by King with the medical model. The medical model of criminal justice is based on the premise that on certain occasions it would be unfair to solely blame the offender for the crime committed by him. It is built on the proposition that criminality of an individual may arise out of individual characteristics or social circumstances which are beyond his or her control. It assumes that at times factors in the personal life of an individual may contribute towards his criminal conduct. Thus, this model is based on responding to such circumstances which have contributed to the criminal conduct of the individual, so that the removal or mitigation of such circumstances will also have a corresponding effect on his criminality. This model is built on the understanding that punishing an offender is not of any use unless the issues which have promoted the criminal conduct in him are addressed. Thus, this model puts emphasis on adopting such measures which will facilitate the rehabilitation of the individual. By its very nature, this model is individual centric, as the circumstances of each individual needs to be addressed independently and separately in order to identify the appropriate rehabilitative approach in relation to that particular individual. The needs and the rehabilitative approach in relation to X might not be suitable in relation to Y. Thus, the treatment is not based on general prescriptions but are individualized in the context of each case and its accompanying circumstances. Towards this end, the model also emphasizes on sufficient discretionary powers with the decision makers in order to cater to the needs and requirements of each individual case. Another distinguishing feature of this model is its emphasis on establishing procedures for collection of sufficient relevant information in order to aid the individualized decision which needs to be taken in each of the cases. The next model which we will be discussing is the bureaucratic model. The bureaucratic model conceptualizes the criminal justice system as an administrative machinery which needs to be managed efficiently. With management of crimes and criminals, as its primary intended function. This model insists on adherence to the established rules and procedures by the officials in order to ensure that the process of trial and sentencing of the defendants is managed speedily and efficiently. This model takes serious account of the cost effectiveness of the criminal justice administration and is built on the premise that undue delay escalates the cost of each case. Thus, it prioritizes minimization of expenditure and an economic division of labor as some of its distinguishing features. This model also takes serious note of a higher rate of acquittal as it represents a failure of the criminal justice system to fulfill its basic objective. A higher rate of acquittal hints at inefficient identification of suspects and also inefficient handling of the prosecution. It may be noted that the features of bureaucratic model are difficult to reconcile with that of due process model and medical model. The interests of justice or rehabilitation might not be aligned with the requirement of efficiency and speed all the time. For example, in a case where after due investigation, the evidence gathered is sufficient to convince the police of the criminality of the suspect, but perhaps not sufficient to secure a conviction in the court of law. In such a scenario, the due process model would require that no further action be taken by the police. On the other hand, in the bureaucratic model, it will be a legitimate concern as to the time and resources spent in the investigation being in wastage if no further action is taken. In order to strictly adhere to the established rules and procedures and ensure optimum efficiency, this model also mandates independence from political considerations. Political considerations involve subjective, extraneous influences which can severely impede the smooth functioning of the system. Now, we move on to the third model which was proposed by King, that is the status passage model. The primary intended function of the status passage model is denunciation and degradation. This model is based on the community's moral disapproval of the criminal conduct of the offender. Under this model, the criminal justice system is supposed to be serving an important social function by reinforcing the social value that crime is wrong and that the society looks down upon the criminal and his criminal conduct. Thus, this model insists on the trial and punishment for any criminal conduct being public in order to instill a sense of shame in the offender for his actions. However, there have been concerns that such a model directly defeats the significance of any rehabilitative approach, but at the same time, there is a school of thought which believes that instilling a sense of shame can also lead to rehabilitation, as it makes the offender conscious about the wrongful nature of his actions. In this context, the concept of reintegrative shaming has acquired significance. Under this concept, it is propositioned that the degree and intensity of shame being inflicted on the offender should not be to an extent wherein it stigmatizes the offender and impedes the process of reintegration into societal fold. That is, the shame which the offenders feel should be sufficient for him to correct his behavior, but should not be to such a degree that it becomes impossible for him to become normal part of society again. Now we move to the fourth model which was suggested by King, that is power model. The power model analyzes the criminal justice system from the perspective of who the dominant class is and whose interests are better served by the criminal justice system. It visualizes the criminal justice system as being controlled by the powerful class in order to maintain the status quo in relation to the strata of people in lower social position. According to this model, the contents and procedures of the criminal justice system are shaped by the values of the dominant class and are believed to further such values. The over-representation of the lower strata as defendants in criminal trials is cited as evidence of this particular underlying dynamic. Now we come to the due process model. The due process model proposed by King was not markedly different from the one proposed by Packer. It is based on the same principle of the accused being presumed innocent till proven guilty and the burden of proof being on the prosecution to prove the guilt of the accused. Adherence to the principles of a fair trial is seen as one of the indispensable features of this model. It also incorporates the principle that justice must not only be done but must also seem to be done. It operates on the same premise that preventing an innocent person from being punished is more important than ensuring that a guilty person is punished. Thus, it accepts the risk of a guilty person walking free in order to ensure that under no circumstances is an innocent person made to face the punitive measure of law. Now we come to the crime control model. This model is also similar to the one proposed by Packer. Under this model, the greater stress is in prevention and control of crime than on respecting the rights of the defendant. Under this model, the interests of the community are deemed more important than that of individual defendants. Towards that end, it operates on the presumption that an accused is guilty until proven to be innocent. There is greater permissive discretion with the respective agencies to adopt a wider variety of investigative and inquiry techniques. Now, apart from Herbert Packer and King, there have been some other models of criminal justice system which have been proposed. We'll be discussing some of those models now. In addition to the above models proposed by Packer and King, there have been several other models proposed by different jurists from time to time. The first such model is the just deserts model. This model seeks to balance the need to retribution towards the offender with the requirement to treat the accused with respect. Under this model, instead of the focus being on any crude form of revenge or incapacitation, the emphasis is on ensuring that the offender gets punished according to the nature of the acts perpetrated by him. Thus, the punishment inflicted upon an offender must correspond with the seriousness of the offense committed by him. Another model is managing offender behavior model. The managing offender behavior model is conceptualized in recognition of the focus on the instrumental offender strategies which are broader than a rehabilitative approach. Under this model, the behavior of the offenders is monitored and controlled, keeping in mind the degree of risk they pose and their record of offending. Surveillance programs and electronic monitoring are some of the key features under this model. Another model is the conflict model. Conflict model is premised on the understanding that different systems of criminal justice should compete with each other instead of collaborating in order to secure justice. It is also known as a system conflict theory. It is based on the proposition that a spectrum of competing ideologies and structures will better subserve the interests of justice. Another model is the consensus model. This model is at the opposite extreme of the conflict model. Under this model, different systems of criminal justice should work in a cooperative and collaborative framework. The quality of justice and its efficacious delivery will improve due to this cooperation and collaboration. A model built on cooperation instills greater faith in the general public and expedites the process of justice. The different models of criminal justice system, as discussed, are but different perspectives through which the criminal justice system is perceived and also constructed. Each model is characterized by the predominance of certain identified principles and values which are shaped by the school of thought from which such model has originated. It is also important to remember that on most occasions, an operational criminal justice system is a confluence of different models and not an isolated reflection of any singular model of criminal justice. Thus, it is possible to trace different elements of different models in the same criminal justice system with varying degree of emphasis and importance. If we are to summarize this particular module, the following things need to be kept in mind. A criminal justice system is the confluence of the entirety of substantive and procedural laws which regulate the administration of criminal justice in a given jurisdiction. Without an identified underlying philosophy, it is impossible to maintain any degree of consistency and coherence in the formulation of individual rules and regulations. The models proposed by Herbert Packer are considered as the most famous of the various models proposed by different jurists. Packer identified two alternative models for the administration of criminal justice, that is due process model and crime control model. The central focus of the due process model is to ensure that criminal justice is ensured only by adhering to a due process of law. The emphasis of this model is to ensure that the procedure followed in the administration of criminal justice is fair, just, and transparent. At the other extreme of the due process model is the crime control model. In the crime control model, the primary objective is to curb crime in the society by handing out punishments to the offenders in an effective manner. Towards this end, this model does not accord a high priority to the rights of the defendants. King expanded on the theory of Herbert Packer by identifying 6 separate models of criminal justice, including the crime control model and the due process model. King felt that confining the construction of criminal justice models to only 2 is too simplistic and insufficient to deal with the complex relationship between society and crime. The medical model of criminal justice is based on the premise that on certain occasions, it would be unfair to solely blame the offender for the crime committed by him. It is built on the proposition that the criminality of an individual may arise out of individual characteristics or social circumstances which are beyond his or her control. This model conceptualizes the criminal justice system as an administrative machinery which needs to be managed efficiently, that is the bureaucratic model, with management of crimes and criminal as its primary intended function. The next model insists on adherence to the established rules and procedures by the officials in order to ensure that the process of trial and sentencing of defendants is managed speedily and efficiently. The primary intended function of the status passage model is renunciation and degradation. This model is based on the community's moral disapproval of the criminal conduct of the offender. The next model, that is the power model, analyzes the criminal justice system from the perspective of who the dominant class is and whose interests are better served by the criminal justice system. It visualizes the criminal justice system as being controlled by the powerful class in order to maintain the status quo in relation to the people in the lower position. Under the managing offender behavior model, the behavior of the offenders is monitored and controlled, keeping in mind the degree of risk they pose for the society and the record of their offending. The conflict model is premised on the understanding that different systems of criminal justice should compete with each other instead of collaborating in order to secure justice. The consensus model is at the opposite extreme of the conflict model, and under this model, different systems of criminal justice should work in a cooperative and collaborative framework. It is also important to remember that on most occasions, an operational criminal justice system is a confluence of different models and not the isolated reflection of any singular model of criminal justice. That would be all. Thank you.